You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Golseth.
Joining us today are friends from Youth Ministry who have been doing an outstanding podcast for a while now, and we want to share with you some insights on that podcast and particularly on Youth Ministry. Joining us today, DCE Julianna Shults, Program Manager in Youth Ministry. DCE Julianna Shults, thanks for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here.
Do you like your new name, DCianna?
Sure. It integrates all of it, title and name.
And the Reverend Mark Kiessling, Director for LCMS Youth Ministry. Mark, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So you all have been working diligently on a new podcast this past year. It's been going for several months now. Has it been a year yet? End Goals podcast. How long has this been going, Mark?
Not quite. Since this last fall is when we kind of geared it in with some youth gathering speakers and some other resources that we were putting out. So I guess we're about six months, about half a year.
And Julianna, what's been the highlight of doing a podcast on youth ministry, the End Goals podcast for you?
Oh, I appreciate so much that we've had some fantastic people come on and talk about both their experience as a youth in the church and how that formed them as a disciple, and then to hear them talk about young people in the church and how we can serve them. It's been really exciting to hear them share some of those stories and encourage youth leaders in churches all across the country.
So what is End Goals podcast for those who haven't listened to it yet? Julianna?
So End Goals is a podcast that we designed primarily to help kind of targeting mostly lay leaders. Most of our congregations have youth ministries that are lay-led, to encourage them, to resource them, to help have some discussions and encouragement that might help them just think differently about how they do youth ministry and to help them create healthy youth ministries.
Mark, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think as we continue to have some more topics and things that come up, we've talked about having some things for parents. Certainly wrestle with those things too, or those ordained and also commissioned ministers that work in youth ministry too. And we've, as time have gone on with our Making Disciples for Life effort within Office of National Missions, really focused on talking about how do we help young people be disciples of Jesus for life. And helping that focus on that, like Julianna said, it might be rethinking some things in youth ministry, but then also bringing us back to some of those core pieces we know from Scripture and from our history and what as Lutherans we value in connecting with young people and children.
What are some of the recent topics that you've talked about, or things that you want to be covering to give some more ideas and things to people who work with youth in the church?
Absolutely. So to get us started is we kind of did two main things. And one is that we took some speakers that were at the LCMS Youth Gathering this last summer who had also written some resources for us, Bible studies and things that are on the Youth eSource. And we brought them kind of back to talk a little bit about maybe some of the things that they learned through the gathering experience, interactions they had with the young people or with the adults. Just to speak to that in terms of questions maybe they got, or maybe things they would have done differently after having that interaction with young people. And then to talk about the study themselves. And so some have taken on even a new meaning in the current situation we're in terms of, how do we as Lutherans respond and Christians respond when life around us seems to be confusing and so out of control. And so that there are topics like that they're able to speak to. And the other thing that we did is Julianna and I took some time to talk about the 7 practices of healthy youth ministry. So that was something that we had unveiled at the youth gathering and then continued to resource for that. And so that just kind of gave us some time to talk a little bit more about what we learned through the research that we did with LCMS Millennials and how we developed the 7 practices. And we hope that's a resource as well for churches and for youth ministry practitioners. And now kind of going ahead as we're continuing to say, like, what are some basic things that we need to talk about in youth ministry? We're going to have a new series coming out about risk management and how do you use maybe large events in your youth ministry. And then certainly we had a special one too that was about what does youth ministry look like in this time of COVID-19. So try to hit some maybe those real practical issues that are happening within our youth ministries.
What are you hearing from those who care for youth, those who are youth leaders, DCEs, others who are caring for youth during this time of pandemic. How has the pandemic affected how they care for youth? Mark?
It's been really interesting.
Go ahead, Julianna.
It's been really interesting to see how different youth leaders are approaching care for their young people right now. There's a lot of innovation in terms of using technology, in using different means, but also just phone calls, text messages, reaching out to young people. A lot of them are really mourning the loss of the end of their school year, and especially for our seniors who are missing a lot of major life events. How are they going to kind of navigate through life as they miss those things? And then just a disconnection for our young people who are already kind of fairly disconnected, and that loss of relationship has been big, and along with so much worry. A lot of youth leaders are talking about how to care for the spiritual well-being of their young people, but also of their mental health as well.
So you recently had a special episode on End Goals podcast to help us with some of these issues during the pandemic. What are some of the highlights that we can look for in the special episode of End Goals podcast? Julianna?
So we talk a little bit about what are the technology pieces that can be useful. So we talk a little bit about how you might use video conferencing software, other places to be able to reach out and to connect. But then also, how are you thinking about just reaching out to those families who might be a little overwhelmed right now, or young people who are a little overwhelmed right now, and reaching out with words of comfort. We talk a little bit about the resources that we are providing using Youth eSource and also our Facebook group to be able to share some ways that might be helpful for youth leaders who are also a little overwhelmed right now, many with kids at home and working from home, and also trying to care for young people in their church. So we tried to provide some solid resources for them to be able to share as well.
Mark, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think one thing for us going forward too, in terms of how long this might extend it out, is we've gotten some requests and trying to gear things too in terms of how to help families have those devotions and discussions at home as well. I especially think Julianna mentioned this, maybe some of our students, seniors, and those that are in some time of maybe uncertainty for finishing out a school year, and then also what is next. So helping families have that talk with the unique part of their life with high school students. And just so, again, they're reminded of the love of Christ through that all, the forgiveness that we have, and who they are as a family, but then certainly that their church cares for them as well.
Mark, what are some of the highlights of the ways that churches and the youth leaders have been able to still keep those relationships with youth during this time when we're all separated from each other?
Yeah, I think it's been fascinating to see youth workers, really talk about those importance of those relationships. And so, oftentimes we can talk in ministry about programs and relationships, and you see here where that strength of that relationship piece comes in, and the desire for pastors and DCEs and teachers and other youth workers wanting to connect with their kids because they miss them, they love them, and the kids wanting to connect too with peers in that environment. So that's really neat to see that. And so I think it's shown again that the church cares for them. It shows, I think it's really fun to watch our young people lead. Like they're kind of like, hey, church, welcome to our world. We do this all the time on the digital platforms. And so they're teaching us at how these really can be tools. Certainly doesn't replace face-to-face connection. We can't wait till we can be back in our worshiping communities and receive the sacrament and to see each other again. Maybe we won't be giving hugs and handshakes in the same way we have, but yet just to be able to see faces again is going to be awesome. But yet still that young people see like, man, we can be in the Word together. We can be encouraging each other. We can be in prayer. And we're going to get through this together by God's grace and by His strength. And so that's been really neat, I think, see churches say, because we care about each other enough, we're going to figure this out. And we're going to stay connected. And so I think some really good fruit is coming out of those relational connections.
It's been so cool to see that we even saw a youth leader who was having youth group on Minecraft. They recreated their youth room on the Minecraft server and had interaction there, or people using really innovative tools to be able to create some really cool new connections.
Who do you want to check out the End Goals podcast, and especially the special COVID-19 episode?
I think it'd really be helpful for parents, all church workers, again, whether full-time, ordained or commissioned, but also those who work in a lot of different areas, and also our lay leaders too are supporting young people. It was great to be able to interact when Julianna really did a great job of putting together some helpful tips on Zoom and other video resources, and some people got it right away and they're like, oh, this is going to help us in our elders meetings and things like that too, that we're trying to figure this out. So I think really anyone can benefit from some of those practical things. And then to more of the other meat things, again, it'd probably be pieces that the young people themselves can have some devotions, as well as some self-study resources, some Bible studies, but then also some things that as those church workers and parents are together in community, in their homes, but then also on Zoom and other platforms, they can have some study and some time and some work together, and really some discussion to hopefully process this and be in relational and spiritual connection that way.
Very good. Any upcoming episodes that you want to highlight, or upcoming topics that you want to highlight in the End Goals podcast?
Yeah, we're getting ready to, as Mark said, do this series, kind of a starter pack, if you will, for somebody who might be listening who has never done youth ministry before, but needs sort of a primer on basic things like risk management, like utilizing large events, how to capitalize on volunteers in your youth ministry, in those kinds of areas. And so we're looking forward to that, and then to finishing up conversations with folks on resources from the gathering. And then we're going to do a series on our research that we did and the book that just came out on that called Relationships Count, and talking a little bit more about that in depth.
Well, very good. Thank you, Julianna Shults, Program Manager in Youth Ministry, and the Reverend Mark Kiessling, Director of Youth Ministry, hosts of End Goals Podcast. You can find it right here on kfuo.org or anywhere you get podcasts. Thank you so much to both of you for spending some time with us here on the Coffee Hour.
You bet. Thank you, and
Thanks
be well.
for having us.
You're listening to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Golseth.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit kfuo.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@kfuo.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.